Hello, everyone. So we are now in the fourth week of the semester, and this week we're going to look at the French Revolution and how it influenced British writers. So you may be asking yourself, well, why are we looking at the French Revolution in a British literature class? But the truth is, Great Britain, particularly England, was looking very closely at the events that were going on in France during the French Revolution, because there was a question about the monarchy in England at the time, and so the question was, do we want to overthrow it the way the French are doing? Now, bear in mind that they had already overthrown the monarchy once when they beheaded Charles I, and then they restored the monarchy 11 years later when Charles II was restored to the throne, who was, of course, Charles I's son. So, they had already tried that once, and now they're looking at what's going on in France and looking at democracy, basically, whether it would be successful or not. Um, the events of the French Revolution are very interesting. They start with the ascension of King Louis XVI to the throne and Marie Antoinette, who was very unpopular as the Queen of France. Uh, there were droughts, there were famine, there were all kinds of, the French government was basically on the verge of bankruptcy. There were all kinds of problems that led up to the 98% of the French population saying we don't need a monarchy anymore versus the 2% that had all the power. And those were the monarchs and the clerics, the people of the church and things like that. So that all comes to a head in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille. And there were certain events that led up to that. And then eventually, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette would both be beheaded, and that would kick off something known as the Reign of Terror that would last for about 10 months and was a horrifying time in French history. Now, the readings for this week. Before there were Fox News and MSNBC, and before there was social media, there was something known as pamphlets. Pamphlets were kind of new at the time in the late 1700s and the early 1800s because people, a couple of things happened. One was the invention of the printing press, which allowed for the dissemination of literature all across the country. And the other was that more people could read and write than ever before in history. Now, that, of course, was only about 50% of the population or somewhere thereabouts, but still, more people could read or write. And the printing press made it possible for people to be able to get a hold of these pamphlets because once people started reading they couldn't get enough, right? Think about today how a lot of people can't get off their phones or can't get off social media. Well, back in those years it was literature, it was printed literature that people just were needing more and more of, and a lot of political debate was occurring in these pamphlets just like in social media. Why did I bring that up? A couple of reasons. One, you do have a reading quiz. It's going to cover the History Channel's uh, link on the French Revolution, and it's going to cover the reading by Burke, who was a royalist and who thought, Burke was a conservative, which would probably be about today's Republican, who thought things were fine. We don't need to overthrow the king. We don't need to overthrow the monarchy. Things should stay as they are, right? People should have their social class determined by birthright. People should not be allowed to rise up from poverty into wealth, things like that. On the other side, you have Mary Wollstonecraft and Thomas Paine, who would be the equivalent of Democrats today, who said, "Oh, no, 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 the revolution in France is just fine," right? So Burke is going to speak out against the revolution in France. He's going to say, "Oh, I've met the king and queen; they're nice people. Uh, there's no reason to overthrow them." Remember, they're still alive when these pamphlets are coming out, so um, there's no reason to overthrow them. This is horrendous. And Paine and Wollstonecraft are going to be like, you know what? You're an old fossil, right? It's time for change. And what's going on in France is a good thing. Now, bear in mind the Reign of Terror hadn't started yet when these pamphlets were published, but they're saying, hey, it's time for the French people to take control of their own destinies and not, bow down to the aristocracy. So um, so you have this debate going on between the two sides. Now, for your project this week, in addition to doing the reading and taking the quiz, you're going to recreate this debate in the form of a social media debate. So we're going to imagine that uh, Burke and Wollstonecraft and Paine are uh, have access to social media, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whichever one you choose. And you're going to take what's in the pamphlets and then add your own twist to them and form this debate in the form of social media. And the purpose of this is to show that these debates on social media are not new. They've just taken a different form, right? People have always debated politics. People have always been passionate about their debates in politics. It's just that now they can do it electronically rather than the old fashioned way, which is what Burke, Wollstonecraft, and Paine did with print media. So pay close attention to the instructions on the project. I've presented an example of what one slide should look like. So basically, you're putting together a slideshow. I've put together what one slide should look like, where there's direct quotes with the citation of the page numbers, and then there's some additions of, so Mary Wollstonecraft is going to make a comment against Burke in my example that is not in her reading, right? So you are basically filling in some blanks as well as using their direct quotes. So I think this is going to be a fun project. I think that this is going to show that political debate and heated political debate is not a new phenomenon. It's something that's been going on forever, and that it's just taken a different form. So this week, the French Revolution and the authors who wrote about it, either Burke against it or Paine and Wollstonecraft for it, and have fun with your project. I mean, make this as much fun as you can as you do it.